I'm coming to you live from Alaska, beautiful Alaska. Well, it's beautiful sometimes now, but today flying, I saw that the snow was starting to come down the mountain, so it's only a matter of time before we're snowing here too. I actually have a interesting topic to bring to you today, something that I've been getting a lot of questions on. A lot of people call me because they find these cheap airplanes overseas. It's been going on for a long time. Hey, I found a Bonanza in South Africa, or I found a Baron in England, or whatever the situation may be, and they find these airplanes for a bargain, and they think, oh, well, if I can just ferry it over here, then I'm going to make a ton of money on it, or I'm going to find an airplane that's finally within my budget. But there are some things to think about when you're talking about airplanes that you find overseas. So, one thing I'll start with is that the United States actually has very lenient airworthiness requirements as compared to other countries. For example, in a lot of European countries, the TBO on an engine or a prop is controlling. So here in the United States, we have a lot of airplanes that are flying, whether it's beyond hours TBO or calendar year TBO. For example, a Lycoming engine generally has a TBO of anywhere from 1,500 to now 2,400 hours and a time of 12 years, 12 calendar years. So in the United States, we can fly engines that are beyond TBO, for flying them privately under Part 91. We can also fly engines that are beyond calendar year TBO as well. However, in a lot of these countries, depending on the country and a lot of the circumstances, you're not allowed to fly those past TBO. That manufacturer's recommendation is something that's controlling, and it's also controlling for a lot of commercial operators as well. But if you're just looking for something to fly for pleasure, then it's probably not going to affect you. So that's one thing to think about. So you say, oh my goodness, I see this Baron overseas that only has 200 hours on the engines. But if it's been more than 12 years since the overhaul, which now we're talking about 2010 or later, now you're going to have to do an overhaul in order to fly that airplane in that country. So that's a lot of times one of the reasons that you'll see them cheaper. The other thing too is that airplanes in other countries are a lot more expensive to maintain and to fly. I always make the joke that we call them AMEs here in the United States, aviation medical examiners. But if you say AME in a lot of European countries, they think aviation maintenance engineer. So maintenance is a lot more expensive. It's a lot more controlled. The idea of restoring your own airplane, if it's a certified airplane, or doing any maintenance yourself, that's once again a concept that's very unique to the United States. So the cost of the maintenance is a lot higher. And of course, if it's a US manufactured aircraft, buying parts or even just an overhauled engine, you're going to have to pay a significant amount of duties and import fees because a lot of those parts come from the United States. So that drives up the cost, which drives down the sales price of the airplane. Because if somebody in the UK were to buy that cheap Baron, it would cost them just as much as it would be, to have one in the United States. So that being said, a lot of people see these airplanes. So now what's involved in that, right? So now you have an airplane, you're looking to buy it. It's located, let's say, in the UK, G registered. Well, now the next step is once you buy the airplane is to get it back here. A lot of times in the United States, when airplanes are sold, we just fly around with a temporary registration. It's US registered, but a lot of sellers do not like to leave their airplanes registered to their name while it's flown overseas. So now you get into a situation where if they're not willing to let you fly back on their registration, you have to now re-register it in the UK and then fly it down on your own registration, and that can be quite complicated from a paperwork and a legal standpoint as well. But let's say that that's a situation they don't want you flying it back. Well, then you can get it N registered in that other country. I know there's multiple DARs in the UK. So now you say, okay, well, we'll put a decal on there with an N number, register it in the United States. Well, now you have to get a US airworthiness certificate prior to being able to fly it back and registered. And then trying to get on that DAR schedule, it's no different than here in the United States. You're looking at quite a bit of time, an unknown amount of money. And then let's say that you finally do it. Okay, perfect. You got it N registered, bring it back. You have to import it at the border, and that's a fairly simple process. And then you're good. But if you fly it back G registered, you bring it back, park it in a hangar, you got to now find your own DAR, find your own person to do an airworthiness conformity inspection. And if that airplane has somehow been modified, and it no longer meets, applicable US airworthiness requirements, well, now you're in all kinds of a situation. You might end up having to do major modifications to change it back. That being said, I have dealt with a lot of people who have bought airplanes overseas, whether or not it's something local like in Canada, or if it's something more exotic like the UK or places in Europe. I've dealt a lot with those people. And sometimes it's great. And the person ends up with the deal of a lifetime. They end up getting a good airplane for a good price. They bring it over. It's not too hard. Everything's great. But I have also been in the middle of horror stories of planes that were bought cheap, whether it's in Canada or something else, and they have to find a local mechanic, and then they had to get a Canadian corporation and do all the registration, and Transport Canada wanted all of this, and you deal with all these other issues, and the plane ended up taking over a year and $60,000 to get brought over. So that being said, there's a lot more to it than just, oh my goodness, it's a cheap price. How much will the ferry cost? There's a lot more involved in it. And if you are thinking very seriously about buying an airplane overseas, talking to a US based mechanic who specializes in those airworthiness, issuing the US airworthiness certificate would be really important, because sometimes the process isn't so simple, depending on how it's registered, what it's been doing, how it's been flown. So that's just one thing to take into consideration when doing that. So the first step is to first of all talk to a mechanic, figure out how you're going to register the airplane and how you're going to get the airworthiness converted over, and then work backwards from there, because sometimes that process can be very expensive and take a very, very long time, depending on the type of airplane and what it is. I know that I've dealt with, people who say they've worked for years on getting airworthiness certificates for airplanes, and other people who it's just a seamless process. So first of all, talk to somebody who's done it before, talk to the mechanic, find out what the costs are going to be there. Second thing is figure out the logistics of getting it back, because if you can't get it registered in the United States and issued an airworthiness certificate, then it's probably not going to work for your mission. So the next thing to do is then talk to somebody who can help you with the logistics of bringing it back. Do you have to register it in a foreign country first? Can you do a US registration, hire a DAR to go out, so on and so on, and figure that out next. And then the third thing would be, of course, the ferry flight. Out of all of these, the ferry flight is the easiest. Finding insurance for the ferry flight, depending on the type of airplane that it is and where it is, and the range, can also be an issue. I remember one day I got a call from 4 people about a Bonanza that was for sale in South Africa. They saw this Bonanza and it was a great price, but they didn't realize everything that was involved in getting it back from an airworthiness and a registration standpoint. The act of flying is the easy part. It's everything else that can make it difficult. So I hope this video can shed some light on some considerations whenever you see that really good deal out there, that really good airplane that seems to be too good to be true, and you think, oh my goodness, I can buy a 172 for $20,000 and have a beautiful 172 here in the US. Well, not so fast, because there's a lot of things to think about. There's a lot of ifs, and there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before being able to make an informed decision. So don't get sticker shock when you first see that cheap airplane out there and think, oh, I'm going to bring it back. It might not be such a great deal.